15.
Thank you very much, Stu. That was really inspiring, actually. And I think I forgot to mention at the introduction that there's a theme to tonight's evening, which is transformation. So that word might come up again. It's not a coincidence. The next speaker has been a resident in Peckham for 38 years. I think she must actually be one of its most... I'm certainly not going to say distinguished, but heralded members. She was given an MBE in 2009, but she's also been Southwark Citizen of the Year, Community Activist of the Year, Active Citizen of the Year, and Southwark Woman of the Year, which I think even a short conversation with her will make it all obvious about why that is. Please welcome Eileen Conn.
Well, welcome to Peckham. I'm a Geordie by background, so I came here 38 years ago, and it's recently that I've begun to think that maybe I do live here. This is my home. A bit of my heart is still in the northeast on the River Tyne. I'm going to tell a story. I was impressed by the blurb that we got about it being, we could tell a story about our passion. So I've taken that quite literally, and that's what I'm going to do. I was sitting in the town hall in Peckham Road in June 2005. I was the only member of the public there, and it was the opening of a public inquiry into a part of Southwark Council's land use policy, long-term planning. What a boring subject, which was that I was the only person there from the public. But there was an opening barrister giving a speech about the site just, in fact, across the railway tracks, which was why I was there. I was quite interested, because we hadn't been able to find out much information about it. And I was quite surprised to discover that it was possible to get onto the site, because it didn't look as though you could from outside, walking around the streets. So in the next week or so, I decided to go, and I walked into the address, 133 Rye Lane. Where are we in terms? So, in fact, this was the site. We don't want to get onto the next slide yet, but I was walking onto this site that you could see down here. This is taken up about the same level as we're at here, across the railway tracks. And the site that had emerged in this inquiry, a 7-acre site in the middle of this town centre, was going to be completely flattened, demolished totally, as far as those white buildings that you can see, and even further south. And it was going to be closed off 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for a high-security tram depot site. Now, the words tram depot had been in the planning documents, but nobody quite knew what this was. So I thought I'd better go and have a look at this. What was it? It was said to be derelict. So I walked along into 133 Rye Lane. Can you put the next slide up? And I entered this strange passageway. Nobody there. And as I was walking along it, a thought just popped into my head quite spontaneously, and it was, is this Peckham's Covent Garden? Now, 40 years ago, I was working in Whitehall, which is very close to Trafalgar Square, and there was a big controversy in those days about Westminster Council's plan to demolish the whole of Covent Garden. And there were a lot of people opposed to that, and it took several years to defeat. So this place that looks empty, you can still walk onto it here. We're not born there. But it was like this. Before then, it was dark and dirty and grimy, and in those days, anything dark and dirty and grimy had to be demolished, and everything had to be built new. But it was defeated. And look what's happened in the last 4 decades in Covent Garden. It's been one of the most wonderful places to be. All kinds of exciting things have happened there. I've enjoyed it myself enormously over the decades. And that was what flashed into my head. Now, I know nothing about the arts. I've not been in that world at all. But I was just about to get to know something about it, because what I discovered on the building to the left, which is the Bussey building, created by a guy called George Bussey 100 years ago, in fact, it was where the cricket bats for the England team were made from their own willow farm in Suffolk. And that was what was done. It's been a factory all the time. And it was then inhabited by over 60 artists and a large number of small businesses of all sorts, and a number of African churches. So this place that looks empty, you could still walk onto it and see it like that. It is a hive teeming with life, human life of all sorts. People think it's derelict or that it's squatted, but this is a commercial building that's let to the public. And so my education in the arts today started then, and we started a campaign to stop the unthoughtful demolition of this area. And long story, which I won't go into, we were successful, and it is now going to find its own life, whatever that can be. But during the course of that campaign, a group of people came together and we called ourselves Peckham Vision. Vision, as we've just been hearing, is very, very important for creativity and for things, for transformation. And so Peckham Vision got started then. If you could put the next slide on. And I had the great pleasure, just 2 months ago, of walking down the same passageway, and that was what was happening. What was it? It was a 3-day weekend book fair created by one of the little galleries that's now taken place in not the Buzzy building, but in the building beside it, that specialises in photographic exhibitions. And they brought together small businesses right across South London who were publishing photographic things. And so for 3 days there was this wonderful experience. Well, my goodness, that's a transformation, isn't it? From the empty, apparently derelict site into this kind of thing. Now, this kind of thing is happening. I could spend my 15 minutes on just showing the kinds of things that are happening on that site, but I won't do that. What happened after a year that we had sort of got into this and started publicising it, the Hannah Barry Gallery, which was at that time a squat in a local street, they were looking for a more permanent place, and they heard about this site because we were giving it publicity, and they took root there. Having taken root there, which is just across the railway line, of course, it wasn't long before they realised what was over here. And so you can see the sort of jumping of the ideas of what can happen when you let things just emerge in their own. So now if we move on to the next slide, so that was that's what the car park looks like when we're not all here, when it's in the winter. But one of the exciting things happening now is, well, we've had such fantastic experiences for 4 or 5 years on what's happening here. Do we really have to demolish this? It is actually scheduled for demolition and redevelopment, but do we have to? The council, I have to say, is responding and is thinking, well, do we? You know, if somebody comes up with an idea where it doesn't have to be demolished, let's think about it. So you can move to the next slide. So here was the opening session for this summer, and it's just wonderful because it expands and expands, and we've had now thousands of people coming from all over London and outside London to Peckham who would never have come before. And I was just speaking, every time I meet a visitor to Peckham who's never been here before, I always say, how did you get here? And then they're astonished, many people astonished, to discover that you can get here from London Bridge, which is right in the centre of London, in 10 minutes. People just don't even publicise our railway system properly. So one of the things that I'm doing, and this is what you'll see, and in the end I'll say why I'm doing it. How much time have I got left? I'm very nervous about the time. I've got too much to say. Okay, well, that's fine. I'm about halfway through. Well, I can be, if I make a speed up. So now I've lost my train of thought. So what do we go on to now is the next slide? So what I was going to say was really that there's something important happening in Peckham, transforming, and to me it's to do with the way in which people who live here are now partly relating to each other. I'll come back onto that in a moment. But this, who came through Peckham Rise Station tonight? Right, did anybody see this on the way? This is inside the station. Right? From platform 3 you can see this. Until 3 years ago, you couldn't see it. It was bricked up. It's been bricked up for 50 years by Network Rail, and none of us knew it was there. Huge thing. So we decided, people who live here, in Peckham Vision, so we were beginning to win our battle over there. By the time we'd thought about that, how did we win our battle there, we had to talk about a different way of thinking about Peckham Town Centre. In fact, that the future for Peckham Town Centre was a place where there were flexible spaces for people to do things. We were already demonstrating it there. This is demonstrating it. And so we'd started to look to see how we could portray this in the town centre as a whole through the bureaucratic planning process. And so what we were doing was saying, well, there's this site, there's that site, and there's a station. In 2008, we managed, after several years of campaigning, to get the station listed. It's a very important architectural station in South London by a guy called Charles Henry Driver in the 1860s, and we managed, after a long time, to get that listed. And so we started taking more of an interest in it. That was when we discovered that the bricked up room. And fortunately, the council had an amazingly, a small grant program that was so amazingly innovative, they had no idea how amazingly innovative it was. Far more innovative than they can ever have imagined. Why it was innovative was that it was money that ward councillors could give to residents to do a project with the council, which gave power to the residents, if they took it, not everybody did, to work with council officers without anybody from above in the council breathing down their necks. Because once the money had been allocated, that was it. So we used that programme and we got small tranches of money to do this. And what's happened is that we managed to work with a council officer who did the project planning, which took some burden off us, while we actually got on and got the work done ourselves. And we did this in spite of the fact that this property is owned by Network Rail, which is even more bureaucratic than local government. And more remote, much more remote and unaccountable. And I have to say, it was sort of in spite of them, though every now and again they turned a blind eye to various things and let us do things. So we have no lease on this, yet we've managed to arrange a number of events in this place, but it can't be used by the public yet because it hasn't got external access. If you give me the next slide. Well, this is the next thing we're going to reveal. In the next few months, we've got the money, we've got pretty nearly all the permissions we need now. This is an original metal and stone staircase that leads into the station from the outside. So when we're going to unbrick the windows and we're going to clean it up, and we think we've now probably got the money coming along to extend it 1/2 flight more to get into that old waiting room, so that we will have an external staircase, clearly not adequate for anyone who has walking difficulties, but we've got plans to do a completely revolutionary thing in the station about the lifts. And it's a very good thing for us in all of this that there's a recession and there's no public money, because it means that the Network Rail and the Southern Rail can't do anything about any of that, which gives us a bit of breathing space to come forward with a quite different way of thinking about how to get people from the ground floor up onto these platforms. You go to the next one. Now, just out, this is the entrance. This is the entrance to the station. You can see how overcrowded, buses, people, shops, traffic, and this, you can't even see the entrance to the station. And if you could just, the next slide. This is what it's like going into the station, a magnificent building. If you move to the next slide. This is actually our vision. So the buildings that are there at the moment were built in the 1930s, and we've now got everybody who needs to take any part in the decision to agree that the best thing to do would be to remove the buildings. We think maybe now, it may not be long before we discover that we might actually, in the next 10 years, find the wherewithal to do that. So it is a long-term plan, but it looks like the council is now going to accept it as the preferred vision for Peckham. It will completely transform Rye Lane. If you move to the next slide. Throughout the rest of the town centre, it's not just here, we've got one of the most amazing collection of historic architecture, a living museum of how London's villages 300 years ago transformed themselves into what we all know now, which is a dense urban area. And we managed to get English Heritage to come and do a proper examination. They completely agreed with us that we've got this extraordinary, perhaps unique collection in Peckham Town Centre of a continuous style of architecture through from the 1600s. We've got a building, if you move on to the... What we say is when you come to Peckham, if you've got chance in the daylight to walk around Peckham, walk around looking above the ground floor. The ground floor shop fronts are terrible. We've got plans to do something about that over time. But if you look above you have an amazing experience. We'll just go through a number of slides now. If you just go, this is one of the old, just go back one. That's in fact the oldest building in Peckham. It's about 1660. There's a house there. And we've got that listed. So, and more slides. And so we've got amazing architecture. And we've got plans that we think may come to fruition, if we're fortunate, in the next 2 or 3 years, where we'll get enough money to restore, and visually, and actually restore internally, the historic features of a number of these significant buildings throughout the town centre. So it will absolutely transform everybody's experience of walking around the town centre and being in it. And at the same time, we hope to do something about the design of the ground floor. Can you move on? Now, one of the things I've learned about all of this, I was new to the arts, I was certainly new to regeneration, never been my expertise. But the thing about successful transformation of the human world is the combination between people and spaces and buildings. Unfortunately, in the regeneration world, it's probably 90% buildings, 5% spaces and not even 5% people, actually. And people come too late. And what we need is them all together. Move on to the next slide. And so if you want to learn more about any of that, do look at our website, peckhamvision.org. Move on. But why am I doing all this? You know, I'm not paid to do this. I live here. I'm actually really rather tired of it all. I've done this a long time. Something's driving me. So what's driving me? Well, that I've actually discovered that something serious is missing in the way in which we do policy making. And I've missed out a step, very important. 51 years ago, I was a young civil servant in Newcastle on Tyne. I was part of the administrative system in the courts of pursuing people for debts. And what I saw was that the way we did that was to make it inevitable they couldn't pay their debts, because the way that we handled it meant they got into more debt. And I thought this was very peculiar. And I asked people, why are we doing this? I was really very young and naive and ignorant about everything. But nobody could tell me why we were doing this. And so I started a quest. And I had to understand why we're doing this. I found myself at the age of 25 going to Oxford to study philosophy, politics, and economics, thinking this would tell me the answers. My goodness, did it not. I found myself back in Whitehall. Well, not back, I didn't even know Whitehall existed when I was up in the northeast. And then I spent a number of years in jobs which were about making the government system better. And I learned a lot. It was a long, hard, grinding road, and I answered a lot of my questions that I'd started. I now know a lot more. As I was saying, that one of the things I have learned, in particular in the last 10 years, is that what's missing in public policy making is the complete lack of integration of local knowledge and local wisdom. That's what I have been doing in Peckham in the last 10 years, creating systems in which local knowledge and local wisdom could be found and packaged and put into the policy process. But I have to say, I have knocked my head against brick walls all the way along that. I can't believe it, that nobody once in the institutions locally has ever asked me why I'm doing what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. Isn't that amazing? I can't believe it. So I had to go outside Southwark, and I developed a theory. I've developed a theory now, I'm being told to wind up very quickly there, a theory which I have called community engagement in the social ecosystem dance, okay? And it's true, it's a social ecosystem dance. I look at everything as if it were a living system, and we are a living system in symbiotic relationship with our physical environment. And I've written a paper on this, which is being published in the next couple of months. It is already on, can you move on to the next slide? It's on this website, Third Sector Research Centre, which is what TSRC stands for. So if you're interested in why I do what I do, and you're interested in the way in which all this works, you might get some enlightenment. Some people have been interested enough in what I'm saying to want to stir up the debate about the way in which all this happens. Certainly something serious is missing. If you move on to the next slide. Well, that's not quite, I'm not quite at the end, but there, we'll end there. But the thing is, what I've really discovered is that what we're experiencing here in the lack of getting local knowledge and wisdom into the public policy making process, it's a serious endemic problem across the whole globe. We've now got a global society which is managed by a technocrat, expertise, professional system, I have to say, which a number of us are part of, but we also live somewhere else when we're not that. We're actually being in our human being skin. And all over the world, we need to learn to do it quite differently. We need a new approach completely. And that's what I'm hoping that my paper will start triggering off. So there you go. That's my